The pattern of impacts in different areas over a short period of time shows how bad the attack was, not what officials say. Missile paths now cross airspaces that were once safe because of distance and diplomacy. When air defense systems in different countries all intercept at the same time, it means that the perimeter has grown and the mission has been successful. A coordinated pressure release shows reach instead of precision, not a single hit. The strikes in central Israel break the illusion of containment that had been present in earlier phases of the fighting. Cities that were once protected are now hurt physically and mentally. The targeting pattern shows that the goal is more than just revenge. It tests limits, finds weaknesses, and forces defenses to change. Explosions are numbers that go into strategic equations. There are also problems in the Gulf. A drone attack near important gasoline infrastructure stops operations near a major airport. The event is connected to other missile activities, which create a multi-vector pressure system. Instead of overwhelming one defense network, this means spreading many systems across borders until they can't work together anymore. The battle changes in real time because of the geographic spread. What used to be a disagreement between two people is now a networked conflict zone where vulnerability defines closeness. Long-range capabilities create a danger zone that connects civilian airspace, shipping lanes, and energy infrastructure. The Al Harb now covers oil, air, and business routes instead of map lines. The barrage's tempo also shows that it was planned. The order of the launch, the variety of delivery systems, and the timing of the response in relation to previous leadership losses all point to a planned response. Not a rash increase. It looks like contingency planning, which is when you make plans for what to do in certain political situations. So the visual shock is just the outside layer of operational design. Air defense intercepts, which were widely reported in the early hours, show how even modern systems can be limited by saturation tactics. Interception lessens, but does not get rid of. To work, defenses need resources, cooperation, and time. When you add up the costs of defense in terms of material and systemic weariness across regions, they add up. The architecture stays strong even when it's stressed. At the same time, maritime dimensions are getting smaller. Vessels in critical Al Khalij corridors change their routes or delay their movement because of uncertainty, not because there are proven blockades in all areas. Insurance rates change quickly because of risk recalculation, not because of problems. The ASUC reacts to threats from the past and the future that are within the increased threat radius. This interaction between a physical strike and economic anticipation shows that a turning point is near. The fight starts on two levels: the visible level, where explosions change the story, and the structural level, where systems get ready for more fighting in the future. Military actions, markets, logistics networks, and government responses all work together to make each other stronger. This situation is all about purpose. The barrage's size is a deliberate attempt to change the operational map to show that recent actions will cost more than one theater. The fact that there hasn't been full-scale ground engagement yet suggests that there is restraint in escalation, which is a barrier that hasn't been crossed yet, but is being tested more and more. People living in this expanding area see the battle as a disturbance, not a plan. Right now, sirens, canceled flights, and damage to infrastructure are all real. These effects also make each strike more politically important by turning military action into social pressure. The speed of this change is important. Regional instability happens within hours of isolated punishment. Diplomatic channels, which usually take a long time to work, become reactive. Statements come after events instead of shaping them. Military activity is moving faster than it can be contained. Even though this is happening faster, there is a pattern that goes back to the conditions that made this level of response almost unavoidable. Taking out high-ranking Iranian officials is a systemic disruption, not just a tactical win. It alters decision-making pathways, reduces timelines, and escalates the consequences of inaction. So, the barrage is a reaction to shock and loss on a large scale. It shows that the ability to command and respond can survive problems within the system. Strike visibility shows that things are still working together even when things are tough. In this complicated conflict, every action has effects on the military, politics, and the economy. There are deeper changes in how people see and deal with conflict that go beyond the immediate shock. Redrawing the lines of involvement is now happening in real time. The first break is hidden under the missiles, interceptions, and ASUK responses, the event that needed a response from the system's logic, not the barrage. The careful and planned destruction of leadership has effects that go far beyond the battlefield and into how the state works. Iran's government is set up so that power is shared between security, political, and ideological groups. This was shown by the firing of Ali Larijani and Gholam Reza Soleimani. These officials turned strategic direction into real enforcement at system intersections. Their absence creates a gap between the ways decisions are made and the ability to carry them out. Larijani was in charge of military strategy and political control within the Supreme National Security Framework. He was the center for coordinating competing organizations. His removal throws off the synchronization, so parallel structures have to run without a middleman. In controlled balancing systems, losing a node creates friction that can't be fixed right away. Soleimani's Basij position makes this disruption harder to deal with. The Basij is sent to civilian areas to put an end to internal unrest and keep the peace at home. Its leaders connect the power of the state to law enforcement on the street. Taking away that leadership breaks the link between national orders and local control, which could lead to differences between regions. These interruptions are more important now that Ali Khamenei is said to have lost. The supreme leader is the last person to decide between groups that don't work in a hierarchy but instead work together. After losing that central authority, the system runs on inherited momentum, and different branches interpret continuity in different ways. The vacuum that results is more about being present than not being present. Several state actors may assert coherence, yet in the absence of a singular reference point, it disintegrates. In some areas, decision-making speeds up, while in others, it slows down. This causes a strategic imbalance. In this imbalance, the pressure to act rises. In these situations, revenge changes. It now stabilizes within itself instead of reacting to hostility from outside. Showing your skills to the outside world makes you more legitimate on the inside. The missile barrage sends a message to enemies and calms domestic groups by showing that the state is still strong even though its leaders have died. This dual need is shown by response speed and scale. External and internal stakeholders who are looking at system resilience may see delays as a sign of weakness. Immediate action, even if it makes things worse, shows that things are still going on. It shows that command structures can keep things running smoothly, even when things go wrong. But this need comes with risks. Taking steps to keep the group together can lower the threshold for escalation. Decisions that can be fine-tuned are made quickly, which lowers strategic restraint. Signaling intensity is more important than consequences, which makes spillover happen more than planned. Iran's institutional responses show that there is tension. Military, intelligence, and political departments must come together right away without any outside help. Coordination becomes necessary instead of planned. This can cause problems with efficiency and alignment because state arms are working toward goals that don't fully match up. This internal recalibration is seen and understood live from the outside. Regional and global powers look at both actions and structure. When leadership is unstable, a state is weak and hard to predict. Some actors take advantage of perceived weakness, while others work to stop unchecked escalation. Formal and informal alliances change. Countries that weren't involved in the conflict before are now because the risk has gone up. Defense positions change, intelligence sharing goes up, and diplomatic channels get busier, though they are still mostly reactive. Non-state actors are part of the chain reaction. Iranian regional strategic groups may see the loss of their leaders as a reason to act and do more. This spreads the fighting across many fronts that are linked by alignment instead of direct command. This makes the operational environment more spread out and complicated. At the same time, opponents are doing the math again. Effective targeted strikes on leaders change the way deterrence works. Taking out high-level nodes makes the command structure less safe. This could lead to more targeting, which would make leadership a war zone. This shifting landscape undermines the conflict's essential framework of regulated interactions and indirect confrontation. Direct actions against state power infrastructure change the way people get involved. Conflict shifts from peripheral pressure to central disruption, transitioning from influence management to control contestation. This change will have an effect on more than just the military. They change the way the conflict makes sense. When leadership is a goal and a response is needed, it gets harder to de-escalate. It's hard to stop a feedback loop that keeps each behavior going. As this cycle gets tighter, the focus shifts from individual events to systemic reactions. Institutions both within and outside the region start to feel the effects of a conflict that doesn't have stable leadership. How far it will spread and which systems will be affected as the chain reaction continues to grow will now determine how bad it gets. Iran's response has spread beyond Israel, changing the shape of the conflict. Now, closeness is defined by being part of a growing threat environment instead of by direct confrontation. Missiles and drones are sent into Gulf states to put pressure on many independent systems, not to do the most damage. This approach makes the battlefield a network, with each node, military base, oil facility, or civilian infrastructure having the same strategic importance in the operational architecture. Air defense systems in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait work at the same time, which shows that they are ready and open. Interceptions at different heights and distances show that there are different layers of defense against different threats. The interceptions indicate a coordinated effort to evaluate the resilience of various defense architectures, rendering them significant. The activation pattern shows vulnerability by showing which systems work well and which ones have trouble when demand is high. Changes in pressure that happen at the same time change how things work. The method spreads out the force, which makes it harder for defenders to use their resources in a smaller area. Defense costs go up a lot because the demand builds up and makes it harder to coordinate, time, and keep track of supplies, not because each attack is too much. Even successful interceptions make the system tired, which lowers the margin of error. In this growing theater, the U.S. goes from watching to actually getting involved. U.S. Central Command is going after Iranian missile sites along the coast, especially in areas where ships are not allowed to go. Deep penetration weapons are used to destroy hardened underground systems that regular attacks can't reach. These targets are very important for Iran's marine force projection. To protect freedom of navigation and international shipping, CENTCOM puts defense first, but the hits range and accuracy show that they have a bigger goal. By damaging Iran's strategic leverage infrastructure, the operation lowers capabilities beyond just stopping threats. The goal is to change the way things work so that the enemy can't keep up the pressure as well. The balance between deterrence and engagement shifts. Deterrence depends on credible threats, while engagement makes it harder for an opponent to act. Switching between them shows that something has happened. Instead of managing the dispute from afar, direct action is shaping it. Institutionally, U.S. forces make things more complicated. National command structures must increasingly coordinate military goals, rules of engagement, sharing of intelligence, and the pace of operations. Even actions taken by one country must be changed to fit within a coalition. Decisions have an impact on how strong and weak alliances are. Advanced weapons and precise targeting send a message that goes beyond the battlefield. It strengthens deterrence as engagement rises by showing technological and operational superiority. It also makes things more dangerous because these kinds of skills can lead to reactions that are either equal or unequal. Every step up the escalation ladder makes people more committed and puts them at more risk. Iran's policy stresses spreading out and sticking with it. It makes it harder for its opponents to make decisions by putting pressure on them from many sides. The goal is to keep things unstable, which means that resources need to be constantly moved around, not big wins. So the fight becomes a test of endurance, with operational speed being just as important as tactical wins. The interaction between focused attacks and spread-out responses creates dynamic conflict tension. One side weakens important nodes, while the other side increases engagement. Every action changes the conditions for the next one, making a feedback loop. Every transaction alters the conflict parameters, complicating the measurement of stability. When militaries get ready for battle, they also use systems that aren't related to battle. Naval deployments change shipping routes, airspace restrictions change commercial aviation, and cyber and intelligence operations mess up financial networks. The battlefield used to be defined by geography, but now it is part of the global networking infrastructure. This coming together has a bigger effect. Military choices now have an effect on economic systems as parts of the war. Missile installations near important waterways are meant to protect trade routes and get rid of threats. On the other hand, messing with those channels changes military actions and strategic plans. This setting makes it hard to tell the difference between security and the economy. Defense actions have an immediate effect on markets, supply chains, and energy flows. The war becomes multidimensional when military, political, and economic forces come together. Each domain improves the others, creating a lasting effect that lasts long after the impact. This makes a battlefield that is not like any other. It has an effect on conflict in terms of tactics, institutions, and structures. The next step starts with the gradual alignment of pressures that affect the whole global economy as these layers come together. The fighting in the Strait of Hormuz is causing stress in systems all over the world. A small maritime corridor is important to the global supply system, but today it is facing uncertainty instead of stability. Energy markets, where stability depends on supply and movement predictability, reset when long-term disruption is possible. In this climate, risk is as important as truth. A fifth to a quarter of the world's oil flows through this choke point, which connects Gulf production centers to markets in Asia, Europe, and other places that use oil. Even a small threat to that flow has nonlinear effects. Prices change in response to physical shortages and projected limits, which means that geopolitical stress affects how the market values things. The reaction is quick because benchmarks like uncertainty, which pushes prices above stable ranges. Futures contracts, hedging methods, and algorithmic trading systems are used in today's energy markets to respond to signals in seconds, which makes this change even bigger. Disruptions in Hormuz are quickly absorbed and spread out across global markets. Traders use military events like missile strikes and naval exercises to figure out how risky supply is. There are computerized trading floors on the battlefield, where what people think and see can change the outcome as much as what actually happens. Shipping insurers change their coverage based on changing threat assessments, and they do so in the same way. Gulf vessel premiums go up a lot because there is a higher chance of damage, delay, or disruption. Some operators change their routes because the cost of passage is higher than the benefit. This makes deliveries take longer and lowers efficiency. Even though they make sense, these changes slow down supply chains, which in turn slows down industries that depend on them. When they feel pressure, businesses look for other ways to move freight that are less risky. Alternatives are limited in capacity and not very efficient, which slows down other parts of the global logistics network. Port flows change, storage facilities deal with irregular arrivals, and downstream sectors deal with changes in input. The system is always changing and losing balance. Energy dealers at the supply-demand junction deal with volatility instead of trends. Hedging strategies are harder to use because traditional models can't keep up with the speed and scale of geopolitical changes. Current data and estimates of how the situation will get worse are used to change positions, which pulls financial actors deeper into the logic of conflict. Market movements show strategic uncertainty because they are based on guesses about what will happen in the future. Combining military and financial disruptions changes the way the conflict works. It now goes after global trade systems, not just military or geographical control. The Strait of Hormuz is more than just a place, it's a leverage point. Controlling or partially disrupting this corridor can have effects on economies that are not in the immediate area. The effect is not the same for everyone. Countries that import energy are under immediate price pressure in transportation and manufacturing. Higher energy prices make the economy more active, which leads to inflation. Governments have to balance their policy responses because they need to stabilize their own markets and rely on others. In an uncertain environment, talking about and using strategic reserves are only temporary fixes. At the same time, states that export energy have different things to think about. For higher prices to raise income, supply routes must stay open. Ironically, ongoing disturbance can lead to short-term gains but long-term instability. As big commitments become less certain, investments in infrastructure and production capacity become more cautious. Other financial markets, besides energy, have secondary effects. When input costs go up or geopolitical risk rises, equity indexes change. When trade balances and capital flows change, currency markets change. People are looking for stability, so safe haven investments are getting a lot of attention. Modern finance is very interconnected, so problems in one area can have a ripple effect that makes the initial shock worse. Central banks and policymakers keep a close eye on events in the energy market because they can cause problems in the economy. Monetary policy already has to deal with growth and inflation. Now it also has to deal with geopolitical issues that are hard to define. Every time a conflict gets worse, the range of possible outcomes grows, making it harder to make decisions. In this changing world, economic and strategic factors become less clear. Military operations influence markets, which subsequently establish the conditions for future actions. As each domain strengthens the others, the feedback loop gets tighter. When flows and rules are set up in a way that makes them predictable, constant adjustment can make stability weaker. After the initial shock, markets slowly move from reacting to evaluating. Not how prices will change, but whether global trade structures can handle long-term stress is the question now. We look at how supply chains last, how resilient the banking system is, and how political frameworks can change. This event shows that the global order depends on a few key points, and that problems at these points can have big effects. The Strait of Hormuz is part of a bigger web of connections. Putting too much stress on one part of the system could have effects on the whole thing, showing hidden AT during stable times. So, the disagreement becomes systemic. It looks at the players' skills as well as how well the structures that connect them to the world hold up. Every time this system gets worse, it gets more complicated and harder to predict. It gets harder to keep the global trade balance. People think about the longer-term effects as this balance changes. Markets may stabilize, routes may change, and policies may evolve, but the question persists. Can the existing geopolitical framework endure repeated shocks of this magnitude without undergoing fundamental transformation? The conflict's structural evolution has changed how power is projected and contested across regions, beyond just rapid escalation. Proxy, indirect pressure, and calibrated ambiguity have been replaced by open-state confrontation, where it is clear who is responsible for what and what actions are taken. This change in the way people interact makes it impossible to deny, which used to stop escalation. The destabilization of Iran's leadership structure is what is causing this change. Ali Khamenei, Ali Larijani, and Gholam Reza Soleimani's resignations leave gaps in the leadership and make it harder for new leaders to take over and keep things running smoothly. When there isn't a single leader, systems with centralized authority and alternative organizations have different ideas about what continuity means. After the fighting is over, fragmentation could change how people make decisions in ways that are hard to predict. Fragmentation has an effect on operational reliability. To be effective, military and security structures need a clear chain of command under pressure. When lines are in dispute or not clear, coordination suffers. Some places make decisions faster than others, which throws off the balance of power. When things aren't consistent, they can become volatile, which makes behaviors and responses less predictable and accurate. The fighting has also made places like the Strait of Hormuz more important. Controlling these routes changes the balance of power in the world. Territory is still important, but its value is more and more tied to the flow of goods, energy, and money. Disruption can be a way to show power, even though it isn't permanent. Threatening movement has an effect on economies that depend on supply. This changes how many countries plan their strategies. Countries look at how weak their borders and dependencies are. Energy security leads to diversification, building reserves, and expanding routes. These changes cost time and money, so current dependencies still have an impact on policy. When under pressure, complicated global coalitions change. Economic and security interests are linked. Energy disruptions can have an impact on a state's military actions as well as its official commitments. Shared values, treaties, and the balance of risk and profit in developing conflicts can all make alliances harder to keep. The calculations of major powers become more complex. Military action has immediate costs and risks of escalation, while not taking action could show economic weaknesses. To keep these forces in balance, you need to work together outside of diplomatic channels. Sharing information, working together on projects, and planning economic strategies together are all important for dealing with conflicts that cross domains. When something bad happens right away, financial systems build in longer-term options into their models. Investors and institutions look at both current problems and long-term problems in important areas. Money moves to places that are more stable, and crisis zones are looked at closely. Redistributing capital can have an effect on growth and the economy as a whole. Deterrence changes in these situations. In the past, retaliation stopped people from doing things. Deterrence must take into account the capacity of the DUR to address non-military threats when economic disruption is a primary strategy. Economic and infrastructure resilience are essential for strategic strength. States that are resilient have an advantage outside of the battlefield when they are under pressure. When these levels interact, the disagreement turns into a stress test for the whole system. The study looks at how military strength, political structure, and economic factors all work together. Escalations make both the groups that are affected and the networks that connect them to the larger group more vulnerable. The results have a wide range of effects that affect global stability systems. This makes us wonder how long the international framework will last. Old institutions and agreements may not be able to deal with the problems that come up in modern conflicts. De-escalation, coordination, and crisis management mechanisms are being put to the test in ways that go beyond what they were meant to do. The adaptability of these frameworks determines the system's stability or fragmentation. The conflict's immediate outcomes are significant, as are its precedents. Attacking leaders directly, using economic choke points as leverage, and combining military and financial areas change the way people fight. These precedents could make similar things happen more quickly in future fights. The cumulative effect alters the perception of stability. Not the absence of conflict, but the system's ability to last and adapt under stress now defines it. This new definition puts more emphasis on flexibility, redundancy, and working together across sectors that used to be separate. If states and organizations don't change, they could become weak. The changing crisis makes it necessary for people who are watching and taking part to rethink long-held beliefs about policy and strategy. The lines between conflict, economy, regional, global, state, and system are getting less clear. To get around in this world, you need to know that what you do in one area affects what you do in another. In this setting, analysis is important for finding risks and opportunities, not for predicting what will happen. In this setting, platforms like Ultimora 24 turn complicated events into clear, immediate, and deep stories. As the system deals with this shock, there are still a lot of things we don't know. Each of these things points to the future of the conflict and the global order it is changing. Will controlling strategic choke points be the key to power in future wars? Dispersed leadership structures, can they keep the strategy going when things get tough? Most importantly, can the world system handle shocks of this size over and over again without major changes? Thanks for tuning in. Stay ahead of the game. Like, share, and subscribe to Ultimora 24 for more breaking news and market insights if you liked this update. Make sure the bell never misses an update.